Alright guys, we're talking about power. We're going to solve the equation today. So power is simply force times velocity. Yes, it's work divided by time, or it's force times distance divided by time, but it breaks down to force times velocity. Strength, on the other hand, is an athlete's capacity to generate force at a specific rate. So it's very broad. So strength doesn't mean just absolute strength. Strength to a javelin thrower is way different than strength to a weightlifter. So here's some terms you need to understand. Speed strength, that's just like your velocity is the primary, the velocity movement plays the primary role. Strength speed, movements in which effort is maximally produced to overcome heavier loads. Max velocity, that's your athlete's ability to contract the group of muscles in a particular movement. Starting strength is where you're overcoming inertia. So trying to get maximum amount of force at the immediate moment of tension. Acceleration, strength, that's the key that we're going to learn a lot about today. Athlete's ability to reach maximum force production for the given load over the given distance of the movement, or it's the rate of peak force development. Absolute strength, that's just how strong you are. So here's where we get confused. It's like power to one person is different than power to someone else. The thing you got to know, you got to understand the distance of an athletic movement. So you got to understand the distance of an athletic movement and the load to be overcome. So that's where power gets confusing. So when coaches discuss an athlete's capacity to generate power, they actually referencing explosive strength. And so explosive strength pertains to several distinct factors. These two are the key. But a lot goes into it. Though. You do need absolute strength. You got to have sufficient amounts, but then it comes down to starting strength, accelerated rate of force development, all these things. So, strength deficit, that's analyze the deficit between their explosive force reduction and their absolute force reduction. So, like, it depends on the movement, once again, specific to the movement, especially the load of the implement, if there is one, and the range of motion allowed. So that's where you determine does someone need to get stronger, do they need to get faster, or they need to do both. Depends on the sport. Deficit specifically is the deficit between an athlete's ability to produce force in a particular exercise or movement versus that of an elite performance. What is your deficit? So is your deficit because you have the force production, but you can't express it in that given time, or you're fast, but you don't have the force to give. So, two primary variables, the range of motion and the load being used. So, when the range of motion is small and the load is light, the athlete will have very limited time to generate force, which necessitates a strong emphasis on rate of force production. A larger range of motion required, with higher loads will provide the athlete more time to generate force, enabling the work closer to their absolute capabilities. So each athletic movement is made up of the following physiological components. So whether you're talking about jumping, acceleration, so that's the key. Like, we just came out with this new ebook, Mass Explosion, where we'll break down jumping, all the different kinds of jumps, 1 foot, 2 foot, approach jump. But like each of them are made up of these components. The key is like how much does each relate to that most movement. So if you're trying to improve like a vertical jump, strength is important. Reactive approach are important, but not as much as if you're trying to improve your 1 foot jump. Anyway, get the book and you'll get more of that. But reactive components, elasticity and the stretch shortening cycle, muscle spindles and Golgi tendon organ. Muscle spindles run parallel with muscle fibers, and they are there to determine if a muscle is stretching, and when it determines it's too much, it will contract the muscle to keep it from tearing, which is good. It's passive force production. The Golgi tendon organ is in the tendon, and it's there to experience tension, and it will actually inhibit you. So it'll shut your muscle down because it's afraid you're going to tear your tendon. So the thing is, you want to inhibit the cold tendon organ and say, hey, we're okay. Meanwhile, you want to get better at using the muscle spindles. So the Titin protein filament is something that isn't talked about enough, but that's stretched from the Z disc all the way to the M line, connecting actin and myosin together. It holds that thick filament, the myosin head. You'll see right there in my little diagram, but it holds it in the center of the sarcomere. It creates elastic recoil. So during the muscle stretch, the Titin stretches and stores elastic energy, and when the muscle shortens again, bam, it recoils and gives you passive tension. So this is why eccentric strength training is so important, and plyometrics, because it makes you more powerful. Titin stiffens and becomes more effective at storing and releasing energy. Titin contributes to residual force enhancement, kind of the same thing, the phenomenon where a muscle produces more force after being stretched. That's why this is super important for sprinting, jumping, even weightlifting. So Titan's also a mechanosensor, so it leads to hypertrophy and stiffness adaptations in things like your tendons and connective tissue. So this is why the AEL and plyos work so well together. Um, More about it. Here's some ways to improve elastic components. So drop jumps, lift and isometrics. So think about doing so. Like anytime you if you want to make your ankle stronger, you want to hold those isometrics are a great way to strengthen the ankle at the specific joint ankle that you want it. That's why isometrics are great for sprinting. So Cal Dietz, he's the one who's got his is it called the elastic ankle anyway? So we use a lot of it. There's also within my new product, my new ebook, there's also a program with it, and there's a lot of his ankle work in there. So isometrics are important to stabilize each joint, the knee, the ankle, the hip. But AEL also important, as we already talked about. Here's my man Tate doing. Let me get rid of the pointer. Get back to my. Doing more jump repeats. So that's where we're looking at ground reaction. The ground contact time is more important than the height. So we're trying to keep it under zero point 0.3 there, and he does a good job of that. Now, starting strength, athlete's ability to generate a sufficient amount of force to overcome inertia. What's important there, you do have to have some absolute strength. You can't be weak and generate a lot of force because you don't have any force to generate. The limitless are a great way. Sif and Verkhoshansky both said it. So because you can use Olympic lifts at any range of motion too, and any type of muscular contraction, and you can use specific loads. But here's a great unilateral. This is Dave Miller's exercise, the whiz jumps. But I love this for my sprinters or people trying to improve their 40s. You're also going to get the not only are you going to get that initial acceleration off the one leg, but you get those elastic components as well. You're also going to get the cross extension reflex as well. So something that's not in this chart, but that's important. That's that reflex that if you start to stumble and that back foot comes forward quickly, the foot that's in the ground is going to stabilize passively and extend even more forcefully. So it's a good thing. Squat jumps, whiz jumps, great depth jumps, and drop jumps. Range of motion specific. Once again, what starting strength for what type of movement? You got to ask yourself: is it a lot or a short range of motion? Is it sprinting? Is it the acceleration phase of sprinting? There's a little bit. Depth jumps might be more important than drop jumps. If it's maximum velocity sprinting, drop jumps. Now, acceleration. Here's where it's important to listen. So, athletes' capacity to generate maximum force. Once the muscular contraction begins, so Olympic lifts, it's hard to beat them, man. So look how quickly a guy weighing 170 can snatch 374 pounds. It's going to be very hard for anyone to sell me that there's something else that they can do to generate that much force at that high of a rate in the gym. So for people who don't think it's specific, they're wrong because we've got him doing 115 kilo power snatches, and we've recorded him up to 4 meters per second. So if you don't think it's specific, go look it up. All the data of sprinting up to 10 yards. We're going to go on. We're going to discuss that even more later. But depth jumps, that's important for acceleration at a higher rate. This is where we're going to focus on more of the speed strength side of things. This is speed strength, but a little bit slower. And then, of course, this is absolute strength in case you don't have enough. For acceleration, you need to ask yourself, is speed strength, number one, you ask yourself, what am I trying to get better at? If I'm a pitcher, speed strength will always be important. But you gotta ask yourself, do I have ample amount of absolute strength? Probably. If you can squat 1.7 to 2 times body weight, you probably can. But now you gotta ask yourself, should I focus on strength speed to get a little bit more strength, but at a higher rate to improve much? Because your speed strengthening all the time in practice. So this might be the sweet spot, Or do I just need to focus on absolute strength and throw the baseball? It depends on the testing. You gotta ask yourself what kind of test you're gonna do, which we talk about later in this. Here's him cleaning 370, power cleaning 374, 170, snatching 160 kilos. Like this fast. Here's the old man. Do some AEL. Pretty good reactivity for old guy. So then, when it comes to improving someone's absolute strength, hypertrophy is one of those components. Do they have enough muscle mass? Active myosin cross bridges. So the more they do it, they'll get better at this. At this cross bridges, also recruiting those high threshold motor units, and then the synchronization and coordination of that, recruiting those high threshold motor units. You get better at that. Here's AEL specifically. Ryan using the weight releasers.
Come on.
All right, guys. So now we're going to talk about all that, how it applies to each of the different, there's when they're talking about sprinting, acceleration, max velocity, there's going to be a little bit of all those components in there. You got to ask yourself, what is the sport? Who am I as an athlete, and what do I need to focus on? And how much, and what am I trying to improve? And how much of these components go into this specific athletic endeavor? So, all right, guys. Now that you understand power, let me break it all down to you. Now you know that all that really matters is you got to know the distance of an athletic movement, and you need to know the load to overcome in that movement. Once you know that, you know this. You know that every movement is made up of like starting strength, acceleration, rate of force development, all these things going in together to form like explosive strength. And you need maximum strength. You need a good dose, and depending on what you're doing, you might need more or less. Sometimes you need strength endurance, but when we're talking about explosive movements, it's not as important. But once you know that every physiological component is made up of those things, along with, of course, elasticity, shortening cycle. I don't want to repeat it over and over again. We've already talked about muscle spindles, tendon organs, the Titin protein filaments. So you know all those things, and that everything's going to contain a little bit of that. So whether we're talking about the acceleration phase of a sprint, that's going to be very different than the max velocity end. Because when you have acceleration, you have a little bit longer. Your foot is going to be on the ground longer, and so you're going to be producing force longer. So that's going to take more strength, definitely more of that acceleration, explosive strength. Once you get going, it really comes down to at that point elasticity. Making sure your technique is good, that your foot is striking the right place, and that energy is being transferred in the right direction. And so, but when you're talking about jumping, same thing. then you know that a counter movement jump, since you're going to have that stretch shortening cycle, and the further down you go, the more time you're going to have to produce force, so the higher you'll go. If you're talking about a static jump, we're starting in the bottom, you don't have that. So that'll be a component that you don't have to worry about. When you're talking about a 1 foot jump, you're talking about a very short ground contact time, again, a little bit longer than, say, a sprint. But so do you see my point? Once you know, it really comes down to max strength, your reactive components, we'll say that, and your explosive strength. Then it's just a matter of how much of each, depending on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to change directions, you have a little bit longer than you would at max speed, but still it's very fast. If you're talking about, a tackle in football, it's longer because you got a body, and it normally happens around that collision happens at around 0.75 meters per second. So it's a little bit slower, a little bit longer. Got to be, max strength comes into play. So that's the beauty of once you understand power, then you understand all these absolutes that you're going to hear online don't exist. It's like it just depends on the athlete and what they're good at and the sport they're trying to do. So if you're coaching a linebacker, he's going to need a good solid amount of max strength. He's going to need a lot of that acceleration. Like think the Olympic lifts, and it needs to be definitely. Speed strength is important, max velocity is important, but that maximum power is more important. If you're talking about a pitcher, things need to be skewed more. It happens at a very high rate, of force, and so you just need to analyze those things, those components, and know what to focus on. If it's rotational in nature, you're going to have that X factor of the shoulder and hip separation. So it really gets simple once you know that little bit of that. It all boils down to everything has reactive components. They have that acceleration, rate of force development. They have that speed strength, and then they have that max strength. And so once you know that, it's just a matter of what you're talking about, being able to test and monitor and respond. A torque, high torque at high rates. Up until now, we've had very little. It's very hard to monitor or test those things, or to actually train them. But now that we have the now look. By the way, if you don't have an anchor trainer, doesn't mean you can't do these things. It's just going to be me until you find a way to test it. It's going to be really hard to to know that you're improving. Um, but the process involves loading the trail leg eccentrically, allowing it to store elastic energy through the stretch shortening cycle effectively. So you think about a pitcher, they got to load that back leg, and then they got to create energy. And so a lot of times, even let's think about golfing. Uh, Roy McIlroy, it was his backswing, his ability to have a faster backswing than everyone. He's only 5'9", and he can drive it further than the 6'5" people he's going against. But because he's so good at the speed of his backswing and being able to control that, and then using all of those reactive properties that are caused between the stretching of his hip. I mean, it's the shoulder hip separation, all or what some people call the X factor. His ability to do that at a high rate, because when you're talking about the stretch shortening cycle, the faster one is able to perform that stretch shortening, the stretch portion of that, the faster the concentric and the passive forces will be in turn. So those are all important. And with the anchor, and I'll show you a few. Here's an example of me doing a little bit of the anchor. You'll see that you can actually test the velocity, not only the eccentric velocity, the concentric velocity, so you can look at the differences in the two. Um, So now with the Anchor and the GymAware data plate, we can test rotational power. We can look at eccentric control because it's going to also measure the eccentric velocity. We can look at asymmetries, the difference in left and right. The key would be doing like a load velocity profile. And once you have that, you can figure out a lot of things. So what I recommend is doing a force velocity profile, starting somewhere around maybe 10 pounds, depending on the motion. Like you can do anything. You can do you could do just like a baseball type throw. You could do a bat, the kind of like a swinging a bat, high, low, high, golf swing, whatever. I would start somewhere around 5 to 10 pounds, increase, 5 to 10 pounds each set. Start with, 5 reps per side at the start because you definitely want to look at, both sides because you don't want too big. There's going to be asymmetries. If you're a great golfer, there's going to be asymmetries. But then once you get, it's going to get heavier and heavier. Eventually, it's going to be slow, but you're going to get, stop around 0.5, 0.6 meters per second. I would, and like then you would be able to guesstimate because we're also working right now trying to decide what are the minimum velocity thresholds for certain vectors. But anyway, once you have that, you'll see like, at what point am I um, am I producing peak power? That's the word. Make note of that. And like, in relation to, let's say if you want to be a really good at baseball or let's say pickleball and you look at like, how fast is Ben John is my guy who, the world's best pickleball player. How fast does he perform these motions eccentrically and concentrically, and where does he produce peak power in relation to where you produce peak power? You'll be able to tell so much. Even like for my guys, I'll be able to look at reactive a reactive strength index. And what I could, a very simple thing is this, is like, how fast are they, is their eccentric velocity of any type of motion compared to the concentric. But what I'm hoping to do is being able to look at like that transition phase. How long is it? The transit, once they finish the eccentric portion, like how long does it take them to then transition to the uh, concentric phase of the motion? So if we can get that, we'll be able to come up with a really cool reactive strength index. How how efficiently they're using those components that resist stretch, like muscle spindles, Titin. We've already been over it. We'll also be able to look at fatigue management with rotational type motions. Well, anyway, even return to play. So I'm super excited. But get the book and we'll talk more about it and stay tuned on that. Anyway. But right now, if you go to, by the way, selfless plug, you can go to Mash Elite right now, and you'll be able to, if you want to look at the Anchors and the data plate that's on there right now for you. So, uh, matter of fact, I'll put the link to the Anchor in this video. All right. All right, guys. Now we've come to the how do you figure out what an athlete needs to work on? When it comes to technique, I recommend going out and filming your athletes jump, sprint, accelerate, change direction, and you work with them technically. I'm talking to you about their physiological components so you can work with them on in the gym. So here's what I would recommend. First, start out with the dynamic strength index. If you don't know what that is, it's in the ebook, but I'm going to explain it briefly here. Is if you have a gym wear, you can take, I recommend taking movements that are identical or similar in the fact are they dynamic or are they static? Meaning, if it's a vertical leap, you're going to compare it to you should do it with a back squat. Try to use the same range of motion, but that's not as important, because when someone jumps, they get a pretty deep squat, and so then what you're doing is you're looking at the peak force someone's capable of in the back squat as it is compared to something explosive like a vertical leap. And so what you do then is you take the explosive movement, and you take the peak force capable of there and how much and then you take what's really capable in something like a back squat and you see where you're at. Are they using their capabilities efficiently when it comes to sport? If their ratio is coming somewhere between like if it's if they're doing like a 0.6 to 0.8, that's your kangaroo. They're using their the available amounts of peak force capability wisely. Or wisely. They're using it efficiently. Now, if it's a point 0.8 or above, that means they're using almost everything they have. And so your only way you're going to improve anything explosive, you're going to have to get stronger. Now, if it's point 0.6 or less, below point 0.6, you got your gorilla. They're super strong. They're your tanks. They're your meat. And so you want to do things like plyometrics and the Olympic lifts and stay away from heavy squats. For example, but on the other end, if they're point 0.8 and above, let's get them strong. Let's focus on hypertrophy. If they're in the middle, do a little bit of both. So that's how you can label your cheetah, your kangaroo, or your gorilla. Now you know. But what about those reactive properties? That's when you're going to look at something like the reactive strength index. Once again, like I've written some, or actually I'll give you a good link in here that you can go to Gymware and read some stuff. But I've written tons on the reactive strength index for Gymware, but their guy Loke, he has written an article for you. But all it is this: is you take something like either a jump mat, like we love our Swift jump mat, or if you want to use the Gymware, if you have the Gymware RS unit, you can do some pretty good jump testing with it. What you're looking for, you do a depth jump. I recommend taking like 24 inches as standard. Do it and see like the contact time. You're taking your height, divide it by contact time. If it's somewhere 2.5 to 3, that's your really good advanced people. If it's 1.5 to 2, that's okay. But if it's below 1.5, then you got some work to do on those reactive properties. So, you might find guys who are, they're doing okay, but really take advantage. If they have like a 40-inch vertical, but the contact time was like zero point 0.4, zero point 0.5, 400, 500 milliseconds, then that's still slow. And so they still need to work on their reactive properties because that means tendons, their connective tissue could be better. If you've got weightlifters, that's a very important scoring, by the way. So anybody out there who's a weightlifting coach, you should learn the reactive strength index. It was almost correlated perfectly between our best Ryan Grimsland and our last place athlete. So something to think about. Uh, then also using the force velocity profile, we've already kind of talked about it. Here is a nice little sheet I'll show you that you can use. If you want to do an efficient one, start at 15%, go up 10%, go 25, 30, 40, all the way up. And if it's between those ranges, then it's good. Here I have a little thing I created that it shades red if it's not good. So as you can see, we have a few elements to work on. I just did that randomly so you can see. But then you can start to see, should I focus on starting strength? Should I focus on speed strength or speed? So just another tool to use. But then besides that, some things to think about. What are some ways I can maximize like other elements when it comes to monitoring my athletes? When it comes to hypertrophy, I love using VBT. By the way, this is not a gym product. This is just mine. It's just I love using velocity based training. And I like to use VBT because I know a lot of you. If I start using like a force plate here and velocity here, and like I'm asking you to purchase a lot of things, but you can use just velocity and get some really good information. But I can look at velocity loss. I like to stay less than 25% for most of my athletes because they'll get a lot of the muscle gain without any of the slow twitch fiber. The negative, the slower force production elements that come with doing things like 40 or 50% velocity loss that you get when you're bodybuilding. Also, you can maximize and monitor compensatory acceleration, which means I can make sure that you can squat 400 pounds or I can squat as fast as I can. So if I say, look, squat your 400 pounds in 0.5 meters per second or faster, they're going to push as hard as they can through the entire range of motion. What's that going to do? It's going to teach them to recruit as many motor units as possible in as quick amount of time. They get really good at synchronization and coordination. All those things are happening. So that's how I can do that. Also, here's another little sheet I'll give you so you can look at like what velocities should people hit when they're doing squatting. So here is an example. If I want to say squat 80% of your 1RM for 5 reps, and I say it's got to be 0.5 meters per second or faster, that's going to be what causes you to, make sure you're using compensatory acceleration. Say if here's your bench, your presses, your deadlifts, pull-ups, even pull-ups and middle rows. That's a good tool for you. But anyway, so like I hope this is giving you an idea of like real power training. So should you express it like just doing weightlifting? Should you get stronger and do plyometrics? It just depends, guys. Like if you don't know what you are, do a little bit of everything, but it's really cool if you can pinpoint, do I need to get stronger? Do I need to get faster? Do I need to work on my reactive properties? Do I need to rate code? You need to be able to test so you don't have to just like throw stuff against the wall. That's the whole point of this video. But by all means, it's the first ebook I've written in a long time. I would love if you guys would go get it. Go to masterelite.com and get that book. It's on sale now. So I'll put the link in the bio if you want to know where to get it. And it's on sale right now. So I think it's 30% off. Let me get the code for you guys. Okay, guys. Yeah, use code Massive Hops and Power 30 for 30% off right now. That's 30% off the first month. So, and by all means, if you don't like it, you can just stop using it, or you could just get it. And you can there's a way you can actually download the if you want to just get the 1 month, download you can get a PDF version of it. You can just have the workouts. I've told it myself. Or you can use our coaches. I recommend you doing this. There's a test that you're going to be able to take. There's a questionnaire. There's a testing you're going to do that's in the program. And then a coach can help you take that program that I've written and adjust it. So if you're someone like me, you're an adult, and you want to you want to do a power program, but you don't want to kill yourself. You say, look, I need less volume. Here's the equipment I have. And one of us will adjust it and make the program just for you. So I would recommend that. And then once you're done with it, it'll just keep running. We'll keep giving you updated versions of it until you want to stop. So, but hope that helps. Let me know your feedback. Email me, Travis at Rise Indoor Sports, with any questions on that. So thank you guys. I'm excited about this, and I'll see you next time.